What if your mind could speak without your voice? It sounds impossible, but brain chips are making this possible right now. Because this is not just a new kind of tech, it's a new way how to connect with the human mind. In this video, we are diving into the real science behind brain-computer interfaces, as this is happening right now, and it is evolving quite fast. In our first episode, we explored the bold promises of brain chips, from restoring lost abilities to merging with AI. And based on your suggestions, today we will peel back the layers to uncover the reality behind those promises. We'll touch on the surgeries, the limitations of this technology, and also see how these chips interact with neurons. And if you stick around, you'll walk away with a clear understanding of how this tech really works. No hype, just neuroscience. Hi there, I'm Yvette, I'm a neuroscientist and an author of several neuroscience studies. On this channel I like to break down how the brain works, decode its mysteries, but also to explore how we can apply this knowledge to our lives. So if this is something you're curious about, I would just suggest to hit the subscribe button. Imagine a surgery where a robot weaves hair thin wires into your brain, or where electrodes sneak through your bloodstream without a single incision into your skull. Well, these are the kind of breakthroughs that are happening in the field of brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs for short. Designing a sleek BCI is only half the battle, because the other half is to get it safely into the brain. The surgical approach can vary dramatically between companies, and that is because each device is different. Broadly, if we had to classify, there are two routes. The first one is the open brain surgery approach, whereby the electrodes are placed onto the brain. And this approach is adopted by companies such as Neuralink and also Blackrock neurotech. And the second approach is the endovascular insertion, whereby the electrodes are inserted into the blood vessels of the brain. And this approach is being applied by companies such as Synchron. So let's take a closer look at how each of these companies approaches the surgical challenge. So to start off with the first company, there is Blackrock Neurotech, which is one of the earliest pioneers in brain-computer interfaces. And their device, UTI-array, has been the cornerstone of clinical BCI research for over a decade. The UTI-array is a tiny grid of 96 silicon microelectrodes, often referred to as a bed of needles. Each needle is just 1.5 millimeters long and designed to penetrate the brain surface to record from individual neurons. The implant is placed via an open brain surgery and remains connected to a small metal port protruding outside of the skull. And it is through this port that researchers can plug in external amplifiers and record neural activity in real time. Yes, this is invasive, and yes, this carries a lot of risk. However, it delivers. In clinical trials like the BrainGate, participants with paralysis have used this technology to control computer cursors, move robotic arms, and also type at remarkable speeds. And doing this just with their thoughts. In one standout case, the UTI-array was implanted in the hand region of the motor cortex of the brain. And with a single array and some clever decoding algorithms, they achieved record-breaking typing speeds, proving just how much information can be extracted from a tiny patch of brain. The UTI-array is not sleek or wireless. It requires some bulky gear and frequent lab visits. But to this date, it remains the scientific benchmark. It is the most validated and it offers the highest resolution system for direct neural recording in humans to date. Then there is Neuralink, which was founded by Elon Musk and brings a radically different approach to brain implants, because it is aiming at combining robotics, miniaturization, and material innovation in one sleek package. The company's device uses ultra-thin, flexible polymer threads, each embedded with electrodes to record the brain signals. These threads are thinner than a human hair, and in fact, they are so small that they are practically impossible to place them in by hand. And this is where the robot comes in. Neuralink built a custom neurosurgical robot, capable of inserting 6 threads per minute, each one carefully guided to avoid any blood vessels. This helps to prevent bleeding, inflammation, and any long-term immune response. During surgery, a small portion of the skull is removed and the robot starts to insert the threads into the cortex. And once the surgery is done, all the electronics, including amplifiers, battery, and processor, are sealed inside a small implant that fits with the skull like a puzzle piece. and thus requiring no wires and also no hardware visible. Neuralink's first generation implants aimed at having 3072 electrodes distributed along 96 threads. The idea is simple: the more electrodes, the more data. And with onboard custom chips handling signal digitization, the implant can wirelessly transmit brain activity with high precision. And the big promise? A high-resolution, fully internal BCI that is scalable for future human use. And not just in labs, but potentially for everyday life. Neuralink's bet is that by solving the hardest technical problems early, like robotic surgery, wireless transmission, and also by using flexible biocompatible threads, they hope to eventually bring brain interfaces from science fiction to consumer tech. However, of course, this promise comes with its own challenges, such as regulatory approval, safety, and durability. But one thing has to be said about Neuralink: it's definitely aiming higher than the rest in the field in terms of scale and ambition. And then there is Synchron, which takes a totally different surgical path, one that doesn't require brain surgery at all. Instead of drilling into the skull, they access the brain through the body's own blood vessels. Their device is known as the stentrode, which is essentially an electrode array embedded into a stent. And just to clarify, a stent is usually used in cardiology, and it looks like a tube made out of flexible metal mesh. And the genius of Synchron's approach is to use the existing brain's blood vessels as a delivery route. No skull opening and therefore no brain surgery. So all it needs is just a catheter and some clever engineering. So here's how it works. A neurosurgeon makes a small incision in the area where the jugular vein is and threads a catheter up through the venous system into a large vein in the motor cortex, called the superior sagittal sinus. Once there, the stent is deployed. It expands and gently presses its electrodes against the vessel wall, close enough to detect neural activity from adjacent brain tissue. A thin wire lead runs from the stent down through the veins and connects to a telemetry unit implanted in the chest, much like a pacemaker. This unit powers the stentrode and transmits recorded brain signals wirelessly to an external receiver. The entire system is fully implanted, and therefore nothing is sticking out outside of the head. And taken together with the fact that no brain surgery was needed, this approach makes it way less invasive than the other two companies. The surgical risks for the stentrode are more in line with routine vascular procedures rather than neurosurgical ones. But here there's a trade-off, because strictly speaking, the electrode sits outside of the brain tissue, separated by a blood vessel wall, and therefore these electrodes capture lower resolution signals than the ones reported by Neuralink or Blackrock Neurotech. Instead of detecting individual neuron spikes, the stentrode picks up local field potentials, which is the sound electrical activity of neuron populations. So while Synchron's device may not offer the same precision, it offers something equally valuable, and that is safety, simplicity, and also real-world feasibility. And in fact, they've already run human trials showing that patients with paralysis can use the stentrode to control digital devices like tablets, email apps, and smart homes only by using their thoughts. You might think that once the surgery is done, the hard part is over. However, the real challenge is to keep it in there for the long term, without having the brain fighting back. The brain is soft, incredibly soft. If you remove the pia and the meninges, it is like custard. It pulses with every heartbeat, shifts with every breath, and reshapes slightly when we move. However, most implants, by contrast, are rigid, angular, and made out of metals and semiconductors. And this mismatch creates a kind of mechanical cold war inside the brain, one that starts as soon as the chip is implanted. So for this mechanical mismatch, every time that the brain shifts, a stiff implant rubs and pulls on nearby tissue. This causes micro tears, inflammation, and over time neuronal death around the electrodes. It's like basically putting a glass shard inside a bowl of jelly. It just doesn't move well together. And this mechanical mismatch over time degrades the electrode's ability to record reliable signals. And worse, it can cause chronic irritation that triggers the next line of defense, which is glial scarring, because the brain doesn't just accept foreign objects, it usually fights back. And it does this by using cells called glia, such as microglia and astrocytes. And these cells would then swarm towards the implant to form a barrier around it. And this barrier is like a protective sheet, and it is the body's way to try and wall off the intruder. However, this wall happens to insulate the electrode, and therefore reduces signal quality and increases electrical resistance. And so, over time, this defense system can make even the best implants go silent. And unfortunately, even if you avoid the immune system's worst, there's still the problem of time. The brain is a warm and salty environment, and as you can imagine, it is a terrible environment for electronics. Electrodes made from metals like platinum and iridium corrode over time, and insulating materials can delaminate or crack. In one major study, researchers examined nearly 1,000 brain chips implanted in humans, some for as long as 6 years. And what they found was that over 80% of the electrodes had some form of corrosion, disconnection, or structural damage. And the ones that were used for electrical stimulation were especially worn down, suggesting that the very act of using them shortens their lifespan. To solve this, researchers are developing electrodes which are ultra-flexible to move with the brain. Think of Neuralink's polymer threads, which are designed to flex and twist without tearing the brain tissue. Others are testing nanocoatings to reduce the immune reaction, or biomimetic surfaces, so that the brain is fooled into thinking that this is just another cell. There's even work on self-healing materials, which could one day repair tiny breaks and corrosions inside the body. So, why does this battle matter? And here's the thing. An electrode is only useful until it can hear reliably what the neurons are saying. If the material fails due to corrosion, movement, or immune response, the entire system loses its value. And that's what makes materials the make or break factor of long-term brain chips. Basically, you can build the perfect interface and you can train the perfect AI decoder. But if your chip fails biologically, everything else fails. And yet, when the implant holds, the neurons stay close, and the signals flow, something incredible happens. Thought becomes data. So let's see how that works. Your thoughts are electrical. So the question is, how can a machine understand this? Once a brain chip is implanted, whether if it's Neuralink's flexible threads or Blackrock's needle array or the stentrode from Synchron, the first step is always the same, and that is to listen. Neurons talk to each other by firing tiny electrical pulses called action potentials. These are sharp spikes of voltage that occur when a neuron sends a message. Electrodes act as microphones as they detect these spikes against a backdrop of neural noise. But like any good microphone, proximity matters. Small electrodes placed right inside the brain or on top of it, like Neuralink's and Blackrock's devices, can detect signals from individual neurons. This gives high-resolution data, sometimes even down to a single thought, movement, or even imagined words. On the other hand, larger electrodes or those placed slightly outside of the brain, such as the stentrode for Synchron, pick up the summed activity of thousands of neurons. This broader signal is called the local field potential, which is useful for decoding general intentions, but not for precise ones. It's the difference between putting a microphone on someone's lips versus putting the microphone at the end of the room. So both approaches have their strengths. So close electrodes get the detail, whereas the distant ones get the general picture. However, how are these signals processed? Raw brain signals are tiny, just a few microvolts. So the first job of any implant is to amplify and digitize those signals. Neuralink's device handles this internally. Their implant includes custom low-power chips that digitize thousands of channels on the spot, and therefore does not need any bulky external hardware. Then there's Blackrock's Utah array, which connects to amplifiers outside of the skull via a head-mounted port, and this enables to send high-fidelity raw signals to external computers. Then there is Synchron, which routes its signal down to a telemetry device inside the chest, which wirelessly transmits them to an external device for decoding. Once digitized, these signals are sent to a computer, where machine learning algorithms start to interpret the patterns. For example, a spike in activity in a specific region of the motor cortex might mean move the right hand, whereas A wave of coordinated signals in the speech area of the brain might mean say this word. With proper training and calibration, people can use these systems to type, click, move robotic arms, and even play video games, purely through thought. Remember the Neuralink monkey playing Pong? Well, before that happened, the monkey's brain activity was observed and recorded while it was playing Pong with a joystick for hours for training purposes. So first, the system needs to learn how an action is decoded, before it can actually interpret the electrical signals through thought alone. But the brain is messy. It's not as simple as mapping one signal to an action. Neurons don't fire in isolation. They form patterns that constantly shift based on attention, fatigue, emotion, and more. So BCIs must be robust enough to decode these patterns in real time, under noisy, ever-changing conditions. And that is why cutting-edge systems still require training sessions, recalibration, and smart software to keep up. And here's where things start to get interesting, because once we start to understand properly how these signals can be read, maybe we can also start to write back. Because in some cases, electrodes aren't just microphones, they can be speakers too. And this topic we will explore together in this video over here next week, where we step into the age of bidirectional interfaces, when brain chips don't just listen, but also speak. And what they have to say might just change everything.